You can start over at 40 and I am the living proof. So alongside some of the obvious benefits that come with maturity and being over 40, there sometimes comes some self-limiting beliefs. And one of the key ones is that we can't start again. So in this video, I'm going to take you through what happened to me at 40, and then I'm going to go into 3 things which I think are absolutely critical if you're going to succeed. Yes, you can start over at 40 and I am the living proof. So if we go back, and this is about 20 years ago in my case, the good news about that is, yes, it's in the past, but I have had a chance to see how it worked out, how the story finished. I was living in southwest London, and I was actually working in the City of London in finance and insurance. Now, I was an accountant, I wasn't a trader or anything like that, I didn't have loads of money. I had a young family, and I had a load of commitments, and worst of all, my career appeared to be stuck in a rut for the previous 10 years. I was in a job which I both hated and critically I was actually not particularly good at. It was a toxic combination. So a couple of things happened in my personal life and it made me stop and reevaluate everything in my life. I realized that more by luck than anything else, I had a really good opportunity to sit down, think, and there weren't too many constraints. So the opportunity I had made me sit down, and I can remember the moment really well. I sat in our small dining room, almost in the dark, and started writing down some of the things that I didn't like about where I was. And I realized that I could basically list, and it sounds almost like a list of everything that goes on in your life. I didn't like my job. I didn't like my job prospects. I didn't like living in a big city. Some people love it. It's just not for me. At that point, I thought I could do with a rest from relationships, having broken up with my partner. So those were the things which I didn't like. And I thought, well, okay, what can I bring to bear to try and fix all this? What assets have I got that I can kind of work to try and improve this position? And when I looked at it, I thought, well, although I'm an accountant in a boring job in the City of London, what I have is a history which has made me interested in small business and, for want of a better word, entrepreneurialism. I was always thinking about, would that be a business? Would that be a business? Maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that. Nothing had ever happened. So I was sitting in the dark in our dining room with a list of things I wanted to change. Then I wrote down the list of possibilities, if you like, and I realized actually I wasn't trapped necessarily. I had one absolute non-negotiable prerequisite to anything which I did, and that was I had to look after my daughter. I had to look after my small daughter who was 5 at the time. I had to be around for her. And I thought, well, okay, but everything else, nothing was anchored down. I could change almost anything else. So I thought, well, okay, what would the ideal be? I'd be doing something for myself, maybe running my own business. I'd be living somewhere outside of a city, but it would have to have good transport links. So what I did was, I thought, okay, let's give myself 2 years to see whether I can turn all this around. And in that time, I will focus on my career. And I was around sort of 38, 39, something like that. And I had to make a few bargains with myself, come to an agreement with myself about how I was going to do it. And this is where the first of the real prerequisites, if you really want to make a change and you're 40 or 40 plus, you're going to have to understand that an element of risk is going to have to creep into your life. And this is something which is quite hard for people as you get more mature, because gradually you amass things and you become more conservative in your outlook. You know what you've got and you want to try and hold on to it. I thought, well, I know what I've got, and actually what it boils down to is my daughter. But I also have other things as well. I had a house in southwest London, big mortgage, but nevertheless, house prices being what they were in those days, I did have an asset there. I had my learning, I had my get up and go, if you like, my entrepreneurial spirit was there. And I began to think, okay, there's something here which I can deal with. But the first thing I realized was I might have to risk things in order to make the change. So what I did was, I thought, what do I want to do? I want to set up a business on my own, but doing what? And then I did effectively what I've done you'll find it in other videos. I did a kind of an audit of my strengths, my experience, my assets. And I realized that one of the things I'd always been interested in was technology and digital things and IT and stuff like that. And I thought, well, okay, what can I do with that? Bearing in mind I had almost no knowledge of it. I needed something to do that. And I thought, well, okay, what if I set up a business which uses my interest to start the whole thing off? And at that point, still being quite conservative, I thought, well, I could actually raise the finance to buy a franchise in the technology space. And so I thought, well, let's investigate that. Bearing in mind I had this 2 years, I thought, well, I've got time. Let's investigate it. So I investigated it, and I worked out that there was a franchise which was involved in computer rental, and I could maybe use that as a way, A, out of my current job, and B, into something else. And then another factor came up, which was in the City of London at that time, the insurance companies were consolidating, and I'd been 5 years with my employer at that point, and we had taken over 2 insurance firms and been taken over once, and each time I had to reapply for my job, and I had got the job in the new business. This time I thought, I think I might take the redundancy pay, because that would give me 3 months of pay while I set this other thing up. And that was what I did. I basically took the redundancy, bought a franchise in the computer business, and jumped out of my staid, boring job that I was no good at. So in order to do that, though, I had to get myself comfortable with risk and work out how much risk I was willing to take. Along with risk comes an understanding that what you're doing might fail. It may not work. It may be that for whatever reason, it just doesn't happen in the way that you're expecting it. And 3 years later, I had to buy myself out of the franchise business because I recognized that there was only one way that this franchise was going, and it wasn't upwards. I bought myself out of it, but nothing ever comes with a wholly negative outcome. And what had happened was I had bought a franchise, I'd set up a one-man business, I had gained huge experience in financing businesses, I had sold a business, and I had learned a lot especially about all things digital. And by the way, if you want to understand what happened with the franchise, I also wrote a book about it, which is available on Amazon if you want to look it up. It tells the story, so by all means look it up on Amazon and invest in a copy. It's quite light. On the other aspects of my life, I had also taken a few steps. In order to finance the franchise, I had sold the house, but I had moved out of London and bought the franchise in an area where I could live a much more attractive life, and bought a house there instead. Now, what you can do at that point is go, well, no, I can't cope with this. But the other element which had basically come into my life at that point was the level of uncertainty that goes around running a one-person business, and being comfortable with that is the second thing which I think you need when you're looking to make changes when you're 40. So it's uncomfortable. You've got willingness to take a risk, and living with uncertainty, neither of those things are really a factor when you're in some paid employee role. And then we come, as I discovered after the closure of the franchise, we move on to the third element, which I think is absolutely critical, and that is you have to start doing stuff. You have to stop overthinking things, and you have to jump straight into something, sometimes with your eyes closed, in order to make progress. Now, I was starting to get to the point where when the franchise closed, I was getting to the point where my savings were very depleted, to the point where they'd almost all gone. But I thought at that point, well, okay, but I'm now in a completely different position. I've got 3 years worth of knowledge in the digital sphere, and as a sideline, I have been delivering projects for my customers on a regular basis. I've been rolling out 20 or 30 desktops for them to use for a conference and then putting them back in again. And I looked at that skill and I thought, well, that sounds to me like I could use that and sell my skill at doing that sort of thing into other consultancies. Cutting to the chase, that's what then happened, and I set up my one-person consultancy business, which has kind of morphed over time into the point where I now deliver programs of work to blue chip organizations and the NHS and people like that. But the point that this illustrates is that I just started doing stuff. I was doing stuff. I was, if you like, one of my favorite phrases is ducking and weaving, which is kind of what boxers do when they're making sure they don't present themselves with an easy target. Ducking and weaving as well changes your perspective, and it means that you're alive to things going on all around you. And for me, that skill of ducking and weaving enabled me to move into a similar business and sell my skills, not quite in the same area, but it utilized and took advantage of what I was looking to do. So we've got 3 or 4 things now, which are: be willing to take a risk, living and being comfortable with uncertainty, get on and start doing stuff. And that is, for me, the third one is almost the most important, because the number of people, as you start doing things and as you start effectively becoming what's called an entrepreneur, when you start getting into that, the number of times you come across people that go, oh yeah, I thought I might do that at some point, or I thought that and that happens to me about every 3 months. Still to this day, I will come across somebody and they say, what do you do for a living? And you say, well, I deliver projects. I have a small business and I deliver projects and programs for big businesses around IT. And they say, oh yeah, well, I know I could do that. And I've often thought I would want to do that. And they don't do it. And that's because they haven't got that fundamental wish to get on and do stuff. And I think over top of all these elements is something which I'm thinking is called mindset. You have to change the way you're thinking from an employee, safe, predictable, possible but limited options for enjoyment and advancement at work. You have to change it into something which, and you don't have to do this overnight, by the way, but you have to change it into something which is much more entrepreneurial, for want of a better word. I don't like the word entrepreneurial because it basically can mean anything to anybody. For me, it means being alive to possibilities, willing to take risks, willing to live with the uncertainty that being an entrepreneur comes with. And the final thing which I think that you need is an ability to spot opportunities. A friend of mine and I've sat down over the years. He works he has another small business, and he works in a broadly similar area. And the number of times we have looked at businesses between us and gone, well, is this a good fit for our skill sets? Do we work well together? We haven't done anything yet, but it's a great exercise, because every time we sit and talk, and then one or other of us will go, hang on a minute, that's a good idea for a business, isn't it? And instead of going, yeah, it is, and then changing the subject, we'll actually sit and do 20 minutes thinking about it and working out whether it's worth thinking about properly. All right, so in producing this video, I've thrown out some ideas. If it is a thought-provoking process for you, if it stops and makes you think, by all means, drop me a note, drop me a line, drop me an email explaining where you are in the process. I'm always interested to hear things from people. It may be that there's an opportunity that you can see. It may even be that we could do something together. I don't know. But let's just see. And the other thing to say is, ask me questions. If you've got anything that you think I can help with, by all means, ask me a question about it and I'll endeavour to answer it. So this channel is all about living the second half of our lives. And that basically means from this kind of age I'm talking about here, 40 onwards, and I cover all aspects of it. And it would be great if you wouldn't mind subscribing, because it jumps about a bit. If nothing else, can you just like this video? That would be superb. And I will catch you on the next one. Thank you.